something happens of that magnitude, it may be we ain't here to talk about it anyway. but tonight, the intent is to try to finish up the discussion that we've been having on the battle of Gog and Magog. And we've talked about how that battle is probably very soon to occur after the rapture. And we've talked about that already. So if I have some of you guys come up here real quick and hand out all kinds of paperwork. Thank you. There you are, brother. Got some more up here if anybody needs them, all right? But tonight, we're going to be looking at this last, I guess, lesson on this particular topic as we look at the battle of Gog and Magog. And so far, what we've tried to do, the major themes that we've been looking at are, number one, who are the nations? We've talked about that. What do the invaders do? We've talked about that. What God does, we've talked about that. And then last time, we talked about how and why all of these things are important from a prophetic standpoint. Like we said, it helps us to set the timeline. The rapture occurs. Right after the rapture occurs, then you have the battle of Gog and Magog. After the battle of Gog and Magog, then you have the beginning of the tribulation, the signing of the covenant. We talked through all of those steps last week. And there are some disagreements about some of the timing, and we talked about that. I think, from a scriptural standpoint, that those events happen fairly rapidly, one right after the other. You have the rapture, and in a short period of time, you have the battle of Gog and Magog. Then a short period of time after that, you have the signing of the covenant. That in turn begins the tribulation time period. Now, the last thing that we said we would talk about was what events that are going on right now, what events are actually setting the stage for this battle of Gog and Magog. And to give you an idea about this, I haven't seen the official handouts that Sister Tammy wrote or put together for us. And the reason that I haven't seen them, we got a few more. It's got some more on this side, brother, all up that corner. The reason that I'm not sure what's in there or what order they're in is because I sent them to her on Monday and things changed so fast on Monday afternoon I had to change and add several more slides for Tuesday. And some things changed today, but I didn't do it to her again. So we're going to talk about all of those things from a current event standpoint. This has been the most mind-boggling thing. And if anything, it helps encourage my heart that we're doing exactly what God wants us to do right now, because this stuff, there's been turmoil in the Middle East for decades since the founding of Israel back in 1948. And people have talked about a lot of these things. But I kid you not. I think I told you all that it was while I was studying the book of the Revelation when I was 18, 19 years old that God called me to preach. So I've always had a real fascination with prophecy anyway, and I've tried to stay on top of things as best that I can. But the truth of the matter is we have seen more happen in the last 2 months in relation to this battle of Gog and Magog than I have seen in 20-some years. Okay? That's how fast things are changing. And so I want to share some of those current events with you tonight and let you see kind of how things are unfolding. Matthew chapter number 24 and verse number 6 says, "And ye shall hear of wars," and this is Christ speaking, "and ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet." So Christ is saying here, right before the rapture and all of the events of the tribulation begin, that you're going to hear a lot about wars and rumors of wars, and we've had a lot of discussion about those things over the years. But what's interesting is that it's right now in relation to the nations that are tied in with the battle of Gog and Magog that we're seeing this happen at a rate and on a scale that, like I said, in the last 28 years, or roughly 28 years that I've been in the ministry, I've never seen things falling into place as fast as they're falling into place in the last 2 months. Okay? I mean, that's how quickly this is changing. Now, if you'll remember, we took a look at the map and of the nations that are involved, and I said the key thing of interest when you look at the map is that the nations you would expect to be the problem are not mentioned. You've got Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia. But instead, you see Iran, the lands that were part of the old Soviet Union, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Kazakhstan. You've got Turkey, you've got Russia, you've got Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya, and Sudan, and Ethiopia. Those are the ones that are mentioned, but the ones that you always seem to think of as being problems in the Middle East, you don't see them mentioned. That by itself ought to raise a lot of questions. What's going on? Why aren't those nations specifically mentioned? I'll show you why I think that is tonight. And I'll even back it up with news articles to show you why I think that this is. Because like I said, we're looking at current events. But if you look at the nations, Rosh is Russia. Magog is what's known as in the area of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and Afghanistan, all parts of the old Soviet Union, okay, on the southern end. Meshech and Tubal are Turkey and Russia. Persia is modern-day Iran. Ethiopia is really Sudan and Ethiopia, not just Ethiopia. And then you've got Libya, which is modern Libya, into Algeria and Tunisia, as we talked about. Gomer is Turkey. Beth Togarmah is the Turkey-Russia borderlands, right there where they border each other. But again, what you don't see, what you see from this is that all, with the exception of Russia, are Islamic nations that have declared their hatred for Israel. That's the first thing to see. I had a really good text conversation with Brother Langley and Sister Donna earlier, sometime between last Wednesday and this one. We were talking about some things, and we're talking about, and it related to the battle of Gog and Magog. And I was saying, I think that's another reason why these Islamic nations are wiped out in this battle to the point that only a sixth of them are left. Was related to a question that Brother Langley was asking. But all of them are Islamic, and they all have avowed a hatred for Israel with the exception of Russia. But as we know, Russia is really a power player, and we'll talk more about that here in just a few moments. Russia, as I said, is beginning to exert or re-exert power over the former Soviet bloc nations. You see a lot going on with Ukraine and all of these places, and Russia right now, to be perfectly honest with you, is matching bluster for bluster. If you just watch the news, it's bluster for bluster. If Trump says something, Putin does something or says something. If Trump does something, then Putin does something. It really is a tit-for-tat situation, and you're seeing Putin making some moves right now in the old former Soviet bloc nations where he's basically saying, you can try to come over here, but I've still got influence over a lot of the world in this part of a lot of this part of the world. But you're seeing that beginning to happen, and you're also seeing this rapidly forming alliance between the nation of Russia and Turkey and Iran. Those are key. Those three nations are the key to this whole particular thing that we see here. So the question we need to ask ourselves, if we're looking at current events, and Christ tells us in Matthew 24:6 that, the wars and rumors of war will happen, but it's still not quite the end. What kind of things should we be looking for in current events to kind of see see how things are coming together? And the answer to that question is, number one, the wars and the rumors of war. Boy, aren't we hearing plenty of that right now. You've got Syria with Idlib. You've got what's going on. And I don't know see, the thing about this, I don't watch the secular news much anymore as far as like CNN or Fox or anything else. I'll read some stuff on the websites, but I really don't watch anything. So I have no idea. Have any of you all heard what happened in Libya in the last 2 days? Oh, that's why I don't watch the other news stuff. I would rather read stuff because I can find out a whole lot more by reading and looking at different websites. So there's wars and rumors of war. Libya right now is this close to being right back in the middle of a civil war. And one of the sides in that civil war is being backed and funded by Russia. And I'll show you that here as we go through in just a few minutes. But we also need to be looking for growing alliances between those nations that we just listed. Russia, Turkey, Libya, Iran, and all the stands that we saw over there on the one side. Libya, Algeria, Tunisia, Sudan, Ethiopia. We need to be looking, and that's why I said watching the regular news networks, even the ones on cable, most of the time you're not going to hear anything about most of those nations over there unless something major is happening right at that second. So you've got to do a little digging to find this stuff, and I'll show you some articles and give you an idea of what I'm talking about here in just a minute. But you need to be looking for alliances. Thirdly, you need to be looking for an expansion of influence of Russia, Turkey, and Iran. They're the big players. And so you need to be looking for expansions of their power, their influence, the alliances that they're making. And you also need to see what's going on with those three nations in relation to the nations not mentioned: Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Egypt. Because like I said, they're all around there. I told you this a couple of weeks ago. I stand by it now more than I even stood by it when I said it to begin with. The reason you don't see Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Jordan mentioned is because before all of this settles out that we're seeing happen right now, those nations will be proxies of Iran, Turkey, or Russia. So they don't have to be listed as individual nations because they're going to be controlled by the other three. I'll show you how that's playing out right now. It is amazing. Like I said, things happened. I put the slides together, sent them to Tammy on Monday. Things went nuts Monday evening. And when I come back in on Tuesday, I had to add like 7 or 8 slides because of everything that happened just overnight, okay? So I'll show you what I'm talking about. Now, the first thing that you have to understand why this is such a big thing is that some of the nations in the Gog and Magog alliance are not natural friends. They're not natural partners. In the grand scheme of history, you don't see these particular nations playing nice with each other. And the reason you don't find them playing nice with each other is because ultimately they have all been involved in trying to be the major power in the region. Okay? So there's always been this competition factor, one trying to outdo the other. But instead, what we're beginning to see is these power players begin to work together, which is really unusual. Okay? What I'm talking about, Russia and Turkey. They've always been at odds. Turkey, especially in recent years, last 20 years or so, actually since Ataturk made Turkey a secular Muslim nation, going back into the 60s, Turkey has had a very Western-leaning mindset. In other words, they wanted to be more like Europe than the rest of the Arab world. Because they wanted to be more like Europe, they usually would pit themselves on the European side, and we all know that meant you didn't like Russia, and you limited your contact with Russia. Okay? That's changed. The event that brought this about and has made Russia and Turkey buddy-buddy was the fact that 1 hour before the coup attempt that happened in Turkey that almost killed Erdogan, 1 hour before that coup went live, Russia warned Erdogan, it's happening. Erdogan took that as a slap in the face from the Western world, NATO, the U.S. and the NATO alliance, who they've been trying to be an active part in. Because if Russia knew, surely NATO knew. NATO didn't do anything to help, and instead Russia was the one who warned Erdogan, and Erdogan has been for the last several years taking Turkey back from a very Western secular culture into a very strongly Islamic culture again. And so when this happened, Erdogan, when Russia says, hey, you better get ready and protect yourself, the coup's about to happen, Erdogan took that personally. Okay? And because he took that personally as a slap in the face from the West, he has begun to pivot toward Russia. Never happened before in history, but it's happening right now. Turkey and Iran have hated each other's guts for thousands of years, even though the nations were known by different names and everything else. And in recent times, Even as recently as a year and a half ago, before everything kind of went nuts with it, well, right before Erdogan's coup attempt, Turkey and Iran have been at odds with each other because both wanted to be the primary Middle Eastern Arab nation in control when Egypt began to decline after the Arab Spring. So it was Turkey and Iran jockeying for position to see who was going to be the Arab power player. So they've never liked each other, and they really haven't liked each other here in recent memory, and now all of a sudden they're working together. And I'll show you how here in just a few moments. As I said, wars and common goals often lead to that term that we've all heard of, strange bedfellows. And that's what we're beginning to see with this Gog and Magog alliance. Syria is the prime example right now. What's going on in Syria? As of Friday of last week, Russia, Turkey, and Iran, the presidents of all three countries, met together to decide how are we going to divide up Syria. I'll show you the articles here as we go forward. And Turkey right now is kind of the wild card. Russia and Syria, or Russia and Iran, are all for bombing Idlib until there's nothing left. Turkey is holding them back. Turkey wants part of that territory, and they're basically saying there are people that we support in that region. We don't want them bombed. And as of today, news article, Russia told Turkey, it's up to you to get the ones you support away from the ones you don't. Because we're coming in eventually. And the bombing campaign that's been going on for the last week has lulled to give Turkey time to work with the people on the ground that they support to get them out of harm's way. Today. That's how fast this stuff is changing. All right? So, and I'm jumping all over the place, so it's hard telling how much of this stuff I've already said that's in these slides. Because, again, it's hard to keep up with because so much stuff's going on. All right. Some nations needed major internal shakeups to happen in order to bring these alliances together. The fall of Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. The Arab Spring that happened in 2011. And then the recent coup attempt that we talked about in Turkey. Things had to happen in those nations or in those regions to make these folks start talking to each other. Libya was run by Muammar Gaddafi, who, for lack of a better way of putting it, he didn't care about nobody but himself. If it was an alliance, it only benefited him. There was no reason to try to benefit anybody else. We know what was going on with Hussein. They had to be taken out of the way. Iraq under Hussein was a bitter enemy of Iran. So much so that Iraq actually used chemical weapons on Iranians in the 80s. And they have hated each other's guts ever since. Now, with Saddam Hussein out of the way and presidential elections going on, Iran supporters control 21 to 22% of the Iraqi government. As of last week, Iran moved missiles into Iraq capable of hitting Tel Aviv and Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, just in the last week. And I'll show you again, we'll show you some of these articles as we go through. And then you've also got this civil war that's going on in Israel, or in Syria. Because what's basically going to happen there, and I'll show you again the articles that'll show you that basically when this all settles down and the dust settles, it's going to be Iran controlling Syria. Turkey wants a little piece of it. But it's basically going to be Iran running Syria with Russia's support. And I'll show you an article where they point blank say that. Okay? So again, I'm not making this stuff up about them being proxies. They really will be. Like I said, the fall of Saddam Hussein is critical because for 1,000 years, during that 1,000 years, Baghdad was actually the capital of Persia or Iran. That part of Persia, what's now considered to be Iraq, was actually referred to by historians as the heart of Iran. Okay? Then you had the thing with Saddam Hussein after the Sykes-Picot thing that we talked about, and they divided up the land into different countries, and then you had Saddam Hussein. He was bombing his own people. He was bombing the Iranians. The Iranians hated the Iraqis. And the reason is because you had two different, can I use the term denominations, of Muslims, the Sunnis and the Sufis, and they hate each other's guts. It's kind of like liberals and conservatives. It's just a bad deal. And so they fought each other, and they've always been at odds. Then Saddam Hussein fell. Iran started pumping in money into Iraq to kind of help them rebuild, was helping them fight against ISIS. And now Iran and Iraq are beginning to be bedfellows. Has to happen. Okay? Here's a news report from True News on 9/7. So this was just the other day. Iraq is teetering on the brink. Iran's meddling via Shia proxies is reaching a boiling point in its neighbor. That was 9/7/2018, just last week. Nouri al-Maliki, the former prime minister, has been able to form an alliance with militia commander Hadi al-Amiri, the leader of the Shia militia, Hasht al-Shaabi. The latter is strongly supported, get this, and arguably led by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Tehran is not only trying to consolidate its power position in Iraq, but is also attempting to influence the government to move away from the Saudi-led power bloc in the region. Iraq is becoming the proxy of Iran. And you can see it in the news reports. Then, you had the fall of Muammar Gaddafi. Again, this was tied closely to the Arab Spring in 2011, where several Arab countries, there was a lot of protesting and a lot of things went on. But what happened ultimately, and this was the concern even when all of this was going on, when they were trying to get Gaddafi out of Libya, was that it was going to destabilize the region. And it was going to basically devolve into a constant civil war in the area of Libya. Bingo. That's exactly what's happened when you study the news reports and look at what's going on. It basically has left the country in ruins. There's civil wars. And it's making, because you've got factions fighting against each other, they're reaching out to whoever will help them retain power. And one of the major players is getting Russian support. You've got what's called the duly recognized government of Libya. Then you've got this other Liberation National Army. Okay? The Liberation National Army is being funded and stocked and armed by Russia, trying to overthrow the other government so that they've got more power in the region, just like we're talking about. This was an article called A Brief History of the Imbalance of Power in the Middle East. This was one of those news sites I tell you I look at about every day, Geopolitical Futures. August 17th, 2017. So this one was a year ago. This explains why, since the Arab Spring, we have seen the meltdown of the Arab countries that grew out of the Ottoman Empire. Remember Sykes-Picot? Countries like Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and Libya. Did you notice these three? Iraq, Syria, and Libya are shattered beyond repair. The largest Arab state, Egypt, which only a few decades ago was an emerging leader in the region, now depends on its one-time rival, Saudi Arabia, as well as energy-rich Gulf nations and internationally lending agencies to remain financially afloat. So remember I said Egypt would not be a power player because basically they got nothing? There's that article telling you that. But it also mentions the same three that we're talking about becoming proxies. This is another article, Jacob Shapiro, The Myth of the Arab Spring, May 11th, 2017. The media called it the Arab Spring. Where there was regime change, there was disaster. Libya and Syria can hardly be described as countries anymore. Their borders on the map are obsolete and denote areas of factional fighting based on tribes, sects, or ideologies. The Arab Spring has led to a three-nation confederation to try and solve the problem in Syria: Russia, Turkey, and Iran. That's what we were talking about just a few minutes ago. The current near-civil war in Libya is between an internationally recognized government and a Russian-backed supporter. AP explained, this was from the Associated Press, thank you. I've got Reuters, Associated Press, everybody in this thing. AP explains the looming final battle for Syria's rebels. This was on ABC News Online just the other day, August the 30th, 2018. After 7 years of war, President Bashar Assad has largely quashed the popular revolt that erupted against his family's decades-long rule in 2011, which was inspired by the Arab Spring protests that swept the region that year. The leaders, here it is, the leaders of Russia, Iran, and Turkey are slated to meet next week in the northern Iranian city of Tabriz, where many are hoping for a deal to avert a calamitous battle over Idlib. There's your three players again. Now they're involved with Syria. Inside Putin's Libyan power play. Remember we were talking about Libya? This is from Foreign Policy magazine. Foreign Policy, remember, is the journal that is the publication of the Council on Foreign Relations, the CFR, here in the States. September 14th, 2017. Literally, this was about a year ago. Libya, which has been racked by instability and violence since 2011, is reemerging as a geopolitical hotspot, with opposing forces fighting for control of the war-torn country, the main two being the UN-backed Government of National Accord, that's the internationally recognized leader, and the Libyan National Army. Foreign powers have begun taking sides, internationalizing the conflict. For Western observers, the growing involvement of Russia, a major ally of LNA commander Khalifa Haftar, represents a particular concern. Now, let me show you, let me see. Yeah, here we go. I've told you before that I'm on the U.S. State Department's email list. So I get 100 emails from them a day. Maybe 5 out of the 100 I actually keep because most of them are repetitious to some degree. But this one is datelined today, Wednesday, September the 12th, 2018, at 11:21 a.m. Today, the United States, in coordination with the UN Security Council's Libya Sanctions Committee, imposed financial sanctions on Libyan militia leader Ibrahim Jadran, who reports to Khalifa Haftar. Okay? In accordance with today's UN listing, which was proposed by Libya's permanent mission to the UN, the U.S. Department of the Treasury's Office of Foreign Asset Control has designated Jadran pursuant to Executive Order 13726. Consequently, all of Jadran's assets within U.S. jurisdiction are blocked, and U.S. persons are generally prohibited from engaging in transactions with him. In addition, the corresponding UN sanctions require all UN member states to impose an asset freeze and travel ban. The reason that happened was because 3 days ago, they attacked the major oil refinery in Libya, trying to take it over again. Because whoever controls the oil in Libya controls the people. This happened today at lunchtime. All right? It was when this was actually reported. So, here we go with the coup attempt in Turkey. A friend in need, Russia and Turkey after the coup. This comes from the Center for Strategic and International Studies. It was an online article that I found. And the reason I'm giving you those URLs, type them into your web browser. You can see I'm not making this stuff up. I'm not taking it out of context. Just go out there and look. I've got you a whole slew of them that you can go look at. Jeffrey Mankoff, July 29th, 2017. One of the few beneficiaries of the failed July 15th coup in Turkey is likely to be Russia. The coup and the heavy-handed crackdown President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is carrying out in response have strained relations with Turkey's NATO allies, giving Ankara greater incentive to pursue cooperation with Russia. Erdogan's purge of the military, meanwhile, leaves it less capable of deterring aggressive Russian actions throughout the two countries' shared neighborhood. Russian President Vladimir Putin will likely make use of the tensions between Turkey and its... I must have accidentally deleted a line or deleted a page when I was redoing stuff. Let's see. Let me make sure. Maybe it jumped. Nope, I must have deleted it. Okay. But basically, again, it's basically Russia is using the conflict between Turkey and the NATO to strengthen bonds between Turkey and Russia. All right? Which, again, Gog and Magog, same thing. Now, what I did a few weeks ago, I made the comment that you should be able to see alliances being formed with the other nations that make up Gog and Magog. So after I made that comment, I thought, I wonder what I can find. And like I said, I'm on the U.S. State Department stuff, but believe it or not, after I got to digging a little bit, I actually got into Turkey's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is their version of the State Department. And then I got to playing around on their website, and I found all kinds of interesting stuff. And then, like I said, I found other news articles. I'm not going to read all of these to you. I did supply the links because I want you to be able to go out there and take a look. But here they are. Alliances with Turkey and Sudan. The MFA, that's Turkey's Ministry of Foreign Alliance for their State Department. You can see an entire article on how Turkey is working with Sudan to strengthen their relations. I also found an article from March of this year in International Policy Digest that showed that Russia and Sudan are cozying up to each other. I also found in Geopolitical Futures about Ethiopia's role in helping broker the Sudan peace process. And remember, Ethiopia and Sudan is what the Bible's talking about when it talks about Ethiopia. All right? Turkey and Ethiopia. Again, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, relations between Turkey and Ethiopia. Russia and Ethiopia. This was from allafrica.com, which is a news site in Africa that I found. They're talking about how that Russia is working with Ethiopia to strengthen their ties. And here's the key for Turkey and Russia both. How are they building the ties? They are pumping in money, and they are providing arms. Did you get that second one? Arms. They're beefing up their militaries. Both Russia and Turkey. Turkey and Libya. Again, the MFA's website. And then I also found another one on that other website that got into some additional detail about what's going on in Turkey and Libya. And then you've got Russia and Libya. This again from Foreign Policy. Inside Putin's Libyan Power Play, the article that I read you just a few minutes ago, or part of it. Then you've got Turkey and Algeria. Again, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Here is an article from DW, which is another news site in Europe. But it said, Turkey's Erdogan, this was the title of the article, Turkey's Erdogan seeks more influence in Africa. And it was specifically talking about Algeria. Russia and Algeria, Washington, the Washington Institute on Foreign Policy, had Russia makes inroads in North Africa, talking about the same areas. And then Turkey and Tunisia. And then Russia and Tunisia. And TASS, T-A-S-S, is Russia's news site, one of their news sites. And they're talking about the bonds that they're trying to build with Tunisia. So, all the nations that are mentioned as part of the Battle of Gog and Magog have got high-level alliances being made. Sometimes it's because of common goals. Sometimes it's financial needs. Whatever it is. But we're seeing this stuff happen at a pace right now that it has never happened, as far as things changing almost on a daily basis. For some of the things like Syria and Libya, it literally is a day-to-day change. For the African nations that we've talked about, for Kazakhstan and all the other stands that are a part of the old Soviet Union, it is longer-term goals. It's like watching a chess match. moving pieces in, moving this piece out, helping support this one so they can overthrow this one. It's a real intentional process. What's going on, though, in Syria, what's going on in Libya right now, it's just wide open. And what's going on in Iraq. Iran is intentionally trying to get control of Iraq's parliament, or as much of it as they can, to have them to set up alliance, to set up. They have what's called a parliamentary system, which is different than our government structure. They have a parliamentary system. So what happens is if this, I'm trying to think of the word, if this party gets 38% of the votes, and you've got 100 people in your legislature, then they get 38 people. And this one gets 22 people. And this one gets 12. Well, the truth of the matter is, doing that, you rarely ever have a single group that has 50% or more. So what you have to do is you take this 38 one and this 22 one and you put them together, and now you got over 50. And so these two will work out alliances with each other so that they can accomplish what they want to get accomplished. It's not just the Arab nations that have got the parliamentary procedure like that. UK has the same thing. Israel has the same thing. Their Knesset is exactly the same way. The Likud is the ruling party, but they've only got like 35% of the vote. And so they have to make alliances with other groups within so that they can get accomplished the things that they want to get accomplished. That's exactly what's going on in Iraq. You've got Iran getting control of roughly 22% straight up, and they're trying to build alliances with the others so that they can begin to control what's going on in Iran, in Iraq through Iran. Like I said, it's all a proxy battle, and you're seeing it happen in real time almost on a daily basis. Something's happening, something's changing. Now, what about the Israeli border nations that we've talked about? Well, Syria and Lebanon are already proxies of Iran or of Russia and Iran. Lebanon, Iran's got troops in the country. They've got armaments in the country. In Syria, you've got Iran and Russia right now, and I won't say they're at odds, but they're trying to work out this deal with Turkey so that Turkey gets the people they want out of there, so that Russia and Iran can go in and wipe out the rest of the resistance to Assad. The only reason they slowed down as of today, the only reason they slowed down was because Erdogan and Putin and Rouhani, who's the president of Iran, have said to Erdogan, you've got to get your people out of the way or they're going to get caught in the crossfire. And we don't want to bust up our alliance, so get them out. That directive came down over the last 24 hours. Okay? Egypt, like I said, is not a major player in the region anymore. You got the Camp David Accord, which basically made a lot of the Arab world view Egypt as a traitor because they recognized Israel. And that kind of made the rest of the Arab world not like Egypt anyway. And then you had the Arab Spring. If y'all remember, Begin and Sadat. Sadat was the Egyptian president. He was assassinated. And Hosni Mubarak came to power. Hosni Mubarak had, was pretty much considered to be the status quo. Okay? In 2011, with the Arab Spring, Hosni Mubarak was kicked out of power. And now it's a guy, I can't remember, Faroud al-Sisi, I think is his name. I know al-Sisi's right. I can't remember the first name, but I think it's Faroud al-Sisi. He's now the president. Found an article today when I was just flipping through looking for some stuff that said al-Sisi's basic thing is to keep ties with Israel as good or better than they've ever been. And isn't it interesting that Egypt does not get involved in this mess? Kaboom. Found that article today. Like I said, this stuff's happening faster than you can shake a stick at. All right? Iraq is quickly becoming dominated by Iran. It doesn't take much at all to see that. Here's one article. Russia ready to go all the way against the U.S. in Syria. This was from True News. I accessed it 2 days ago. It notes, I know you can't see this on here, but it notes that the Idlib offensive, if the Idlib offensive succeeds, the U.S.-Israel plan to remove Iran from Syria will likely fail. Debka's report also notes that over the weekend, Hezbollah ordered many of its soldiers back to Idlib and Hama ahead of the offensive. It also details how the U.S. and Israel had previously put together a game plan for eliminating the Iranian presence in Syria, but that success in Idlib, if they take Idlib like they're wanting to, would consolidate Iran's grip on the country, on Syria, with solid Russian support. 2-day-old article. Iraq and Lebanon is a proxy of Iran and Russia. This again comes from Reuters. This was the article where it said Iran moves missiles to Iraq in warning to its enemies. This was on August the 31st of this year. According to 3 Iranian officials, 2 Iraqi intelligence sources, and 2 Western intelligence sources, Iran has transferred short-range ballistic missiles to allies in Iraq over the last few months. 5 of the officials said it was helping those groups to start making their own. Western countries have already accused Iran of transferring missiles and technology to Syria and other allies of Tehran, such as the Houthi rebels in Yemen and Lebanon's Hezbollah. That's all the countries. Somebody is a proxy of somebody. All the way around Israel. It's either Iran, or it's a combination of Iran and Syria, or it is the influence of Iran and Syria with the cooperation of Turkey. And that's who Gog and Magog are. That's how fast this stuff is happening. All of these articles have come out in the last year. Some of them have come out in the last few days. Post-war Syria, this was today. Post-war Syria destined to be sanctions-busting hub, the Russian-Iranian-Turkish summit decides. I didn't even have time to send this one to Miss Tammy because, like I said, I got this one this afternoon, okay? Basically, we know that the U.S. is putting sanctions on Iran. So what Russia and Turkey and Iran are doing is doing what they're doing in Syria to use Syria as a funnel through to Iran to get around the sanctions. There it is. Let's see, what else have I got here? I think that's pretty much all of them. Oh, here we go. Yeah. This is from Geopolitical Futures. Again, came out today. There has been a lull in airstrikes in Idlib. A Russian spokesperson said a peaceful resolution to the situation depends on Turkey separating Islamist militants from the moderate opposition. You get your people out of the way, and we're going to slow down long enough to let you get them out. That's what I was talking about just a minute ago. And then, like I said, I read you the one from the State Department about what's going on in Libya. And those are the ones that I just printed off today. That's how fast this is going. So, what's the long and short of it? We are seeing in the last, really, I mean, like I said, you can go all the way back to the fall of Saddam Hussein, really. Because in the time frame, it seems like a long time ago now. But the truth of the matter is, when you're looking at it over the course of history, that was just yesterday. Okay? So, from the fall of Saddam Hussein to the Arab Spring, which saw the fall of Muammar Gaddafi and Hosni Mubarak, to what's going on, and that led to what's going on in Syria, even up to today. All of those things have fallen into place, and as a result of those things happening, the very nations that the Bible said that would have to form an alliance are beginning to form an alliance, even though throughout history they have hated each other's guts. It's happening, and it's happening fast. So keep your eye on Idlib. Even if you have to go out and look at other websites besides the regular news stuff. Keep an eye on Idlib. If Turkey, this is what I figure is going to happen. Turkey is going to pull as many people that they support out that they can, or at least get them into safe zones. Russia and Iran are going to take over that last little bit of Syria. And Assad is already, everybody knows it, Assad already is a pawn of Iran and Russia, because they're the ones funneling the money in that's let him keep from being thrown out of power. They know that. Everybody's already admitted that. That's not a problem. Tehran right now has been a little bit of the fly in the ointment because, like I said, they've got interest in the northern part of Syria. This is what I think is going to happen. And we'll see how it plays out. But I think what's going to happen is that Idlib will fall. Turkey will get their people out. Turkey will fall. Or not Turkey, but Idlib will fall. And then as a result, what will end up happening is Turkey will get a little piece of Syria, either officially recognized or as a buffer zone to some of the other stuff that's going on. And you'll start hearing some of that stuff happen. If that happens, as that one article said, that will basically cement Iran in Syria. As a matter of fact, 2 weeks ago, again, like I said, things happen so fast. 2 weeks ago, the Syrian government officially stated that they wanted Iran in the country to stay. And that was 2 weeks ago. So we're seeing the proxies of the nearby nations. We're seeing the alliance of the outlying nations. And like I said, and for the most part, these nations have hated each other throughout history, and yet we're seeing them begin to pull together. Why? Because Ezekiel 38 and 39 has got to happen. And you're seeing the groundwork being laid. The alliance is being built. And, you know, if the rapture happened tomorrow, there's enough stuff in place to allow the battle of Gog and Magog to happen within a few months, as we talked about. The longer it goes before the rapture, the tighter the linkages are going to get. And the tighter the linkages get, the quicker they can react once the rapture happens. So we're talking about, even from today, we're talking about a few months before the battle of Gog and Magog. The longer this goes and the tighter the alliances get, it could happen. The rapture could happen tomorrow, in one day, and a week later, Gog and Magog happen. And we're talking about countries that have never really liked each other or had much in the way of alliances. Isn't that amazing? That was a whirlwind, and I know it was. That's why I gave you all the links. If you want to go out there and read all the stuff that I've been reading, or at least some of the stuff that I've been reading, you can see what I'm talking about how all this stuff. I mean, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs website of Turkey was just incredibly interesting. I could have spent all day out there playing around with that thing. But as far as seeing what they're doing, trying to make power plays. So it's just fascinating stuff, especially if you're a history buff. Comments or questions? Yes, sir.
Heard the news yesterday on Fox News.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. And his term for insignificant is anybody else that after the dust settles could in any way pose a threat to him. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
I'm getting readers from the Department of Defense.
Yes, sir.
I got one today. Russia, they said Russia was going to have the biggest war games since the
Cold War. Yes.
And China was sending 300,000 troops. And Turkey, I think, was sending so many thousand.
Could you please send me that? I had heard a rumor about that. Or I saw that Russia was, for those of you who couldn't hear, he got a Department of Defense email that basically said Russia is going to have the largest war games since the Cold War. And they have invited China and Turkey to participate. China's sending 300,000 troops. Now, I've not even talked about the kings of the East yet. We'll get into that in a little bit later. But the reason that you see Russia and China and Turkey doing this, as I said, this is a tit for tat that's going on with the U.S. and Russia. Every time the U.S. goes out and supports Poland, every time the U.S. goes out and supports a group of people that Russia has always considered to be in their backyard, Ukraine, Poland, I could list several others, then what Russia does is it turns around and it says, well, look who I'm friends with, and they got a lot more guns and a lot more people.